Keep 100% of your claim. G4 Claims.
If you've been hurt in a road accident that wasn't your fault, you should really talk to G4 Claims first. Unlike road accident solicitors, we don't charge you for our services, which could see you better off. To keep 100% of your compensation, have a chat with Nicole and the team. You'll be glad you did. Search online for G4 Claims.
Keep 100% of your claim. G4 Claims.
Hi and welcome to this week's episode of the DW podcast. I am joined by another Welshman, Jonny Owen. How you doing?
I'm very good, mate. Yourself, all right?
Yeah, good man, good. I'm buzzing to be talking to you. I think we've got so much that we could uncover here. I don't even know where to start with yourself, because usually I say, oh, I'm joined by a musician, but I'm joined by a musician, an actor, a director, a radio host. Where do I even start?
A bit of a jack of all trades, really. Do you know what I mean? Maybe master of none. I think I've tried everything, Derek, and sort of like managed to sort of scrape a living by doing a bit of everything, I suppose.
What I enjoy about, looking from the outside in at your career, Jonny, is everything that you've done seems to be driven on things that motivate you by happiness or things that you're interested in. It's like you're obviously a grafter, but you're doing things that you love.
Absolutely, mate. I mean, it's the famous old saying, Derek, isn't it? The man that loves his job never works. And I think if you do something you really enjoy and that you're passionate about, you've got a good chance. They even say to writers, don't they, write about what you know. And I think that's a kind of sort of a mantra that I've stuck with really over the years. I've always thought to myself, well, you know what? I love football, and I love the culture around it, the people that are involved in the game off the pitch as much as on the pitch as well. And I love film, music, the arts. So I sort of married them all together, Derek, I suppose, and try to make some kind of career out of it.
I think that's interesting that you says, I love the culture away from the pitch as well, because for me, as I said, before we were recording there, we're both from kind of post-industrial working class steel towns, and for me, football clubs are actually made up. You're on the board at Nottingham Forest. You'll see this yourself firsthand. Football clubs are actually made up by the people the communities that represent them, aren't they? And sometimes for me, that's the more romantic story or the more interesting story than actually the 11 people on the pitch.
I totally agree. I mean, the town I come from, Merthyr, he said he spoke to Mark Evans, who's a fellow Merthyr boy and done so well at the Welsh Football Association. But we grew up as young boys supporting Merthyr Town, or Merthyr Tydfil as they were then. And, they were one of the most successful teams in non-league. And this was the time when, we'd undergone the strike in South Wales, the miners' strike, which was so crushing. Merthyr, as you say, is a post-industrial steel, iron and mining town. And we took great solace in the football team. I often describe Merthyr Town as the heart of the town, the football team. Yeah. And it's not just, the fact what they do on the pitch, it's off the pitch, the community trust work, the kids' teams, it's a place to go, it's a place to socialise, a place to meet your friends. Motherwell is very similar. It's so much more than a football team. And I think, Derek, the one thing that this whole episode with COVID taught us was, the great Jock Stein, a compatriot of yours, said famously today, football is nothing without fans. And boy, has he been proved right this last few years. I mean, football is everything, and not just, the football itself. It's the social side of it. It's getting together with people, at these times when we talk very importantly about mental health and things like that. Football's so important to so many people, and I don't think it can be underestimated, the power and the value that football has for people.
Absolutely, Jonny. Your story is probably a great example of what I feel is football fans often get a bad rap. People tar them with this working class hooliganism banner, but for many people, I think myself included, and probably you, the things that you learn on the terraces at the football really shape your life, and actually that's some of the most important life lessons that you can learn. I've listened to you speak before, and obviously you were in a band when you were a bit younger, and also came through the ranks, and that almost led and opened so many doors for you. But I would imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's through meeting friends and like-minded people at the football that you get this love for music and fashion and style, and that shapes you as a person and almost drives people in certain directions.
I couldn't agree any more with every word you say, Derek. I mean, I think I was pretty much, sort of born on the terraces, artistically, certainly sort of like, I picked up all my major influences. We just mentioned Mark Evans. I tell you a true story. He gave me my first copy of Trainspot in the book. He'd been reading stuff that Irving Welsh had written in Rebel Inc., in magazines and fanzines, because he was the man behind the very well-known fanzine at Merthyr, Dailem for Merthyr. But even other things, I was given my first tape of the Stone Roses and Happy Mondays at a football match, Even VHSs would be passed to Quadrophenia and things like that. I always say it was a real sort of petri dish, really, of art and working class art as well, and working class culture on the terraces. And, there was so many things. It was obviously the fashion side of it, which was very important to so many lads and girls and people like myself. I used to look at the lads and the way they dressed, and I think I want to be like one of them. But there were so many other things as well that came on the back of that. I kind of really, sort of understood and learned about things. That's the thing. I seen, bands that we all we'd go to a match on a Saturday and we'd all go to watch a band together, in Cardiff and places like that. So I can't really express enough how much football sort of formed me, really, and everything that I've done and do today.
I was just saying about your early introduction to music and how, that opened so many doors. And how did that come about? How did, in the Welsh music scene, I would imagine, and almost similar to Scotland, and I suppose across lots of places in the north of England, I feel that, and you'll know this yourself from working in radio and in the arts, but I feel that the creative hub of the UK is almost based around London. And how was it for a young man in a Welsh band breaking through?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, actually. One of the A&R men that signed this once said that, all the best bands tend to come from places where not a lot happens in the week. London, because there's not a lot to do, so you tend to rehearse and sort of hang around with your mates and sort of learn guitars and instruments and all the rest of it. I was lucky that my older brother, Chris, was a punk in the sort of mid to late 70s, and he would let me come into his bedroom and play me music. So I was very lucky that I had a great introduction to some fantastic bands, and I became a bit of I was Paul Weller fanatic, The Jam, and then from Paul Weller I discovered lots of 60s stuff, and then I found lads who were into similar stuff as me. It's the same old story. And then by the late 80s, I'd learned the guitar, and then I was playing the bass in bands, and then I ended up just playing local gigs, and it kind of grew from there, really. But there was a definite scene then that developed, certainly in South Wales, with bands like the Stereophonics, Catatonia, 60 Foot Dolls, the Manics. I knew a lot of them very well. It's only a small sort of country in that respect. There's only a certain amount of venues, Derek. So we got to know each other, and it was a great time, really, because obviously when the Britpop thing, as they called it, took off, there was a lot of Welsh bands that sort of was signed at that time, and I was one of them, really. So it was a great time, and as I said, I kind of learned a lot, and that set me on the road, really, to sort of ended up working in media for the rest of my life. So I'm very glad that I was from an area where it was like saying very it was fruitful, really, for being in a band and wanted to sort of follow that path in that world.
It's interesting because, you'll see it yourself, especially on the radio and a lot of the bands and the artists that you talk to, but I feel as if there is a drive as well to say, like, if you are going to make it and you are from Glasgow or you are from Cardiff or wherever, it's like you need to move to London, but that's almost coming away a bit, the shackles, that control has almost been removed.
I think so. I think, the world's got much smaller, Derek, since the internet, especially, and in the old days, there were very specific sort of, personalities to regions as well. You'd have sort of areas like Manchester, very famously, and Liverpool,
one, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, they had a very specific character. South Wales, was a little bit more. I always felt rock orientated because that heavy metal sort of like obsession in the valleys and places like that was prevalent. So yeah, I think now though with bands, everything's at their fingertips, really. I mean, my daughter's boyfriend, Dylan John Thomas, he's a Glasgow boy, does really well. Yeah, he's just sold out the Barrowlands and that, and he doesn't have to come to London. He's based in Glasgow, and that would have been probably unheard of 10, 15 years ago. But he doesn't need to move down now. He pops into London every now and then, but he's still very much Glasgow based, and I think that's a pretty good thing, really.
Are you going to come up for the Barra show?
Yeah. I promised him I'd come up. He's coming down to Merthyr the night after because he promised he DJ and play at the club, Merthyr Club, to raise some money for the local football club. So bless him. I said to him, look, I'll come and support you up there, and then we can drive back down together the next day and then DJ down.
I'd imagine you've been in the Barras before, but I think with Dylan, from going for the venue across the road at St Luke's, where it was amazing to see that sold out, just to move across the road and for it to sell out so quick was incredible. So it's brilliant to see young artists coming through.
He's done so well, and he sings in the Scottish vernacular, in their accent, which is great. Obviously Jerry started that off, Jerry Cinnamon, brilliantly in that sense. So he's doing fantastic. He's just signed a another deal with a really, really good record company and management setup. So he's in a good place and he's in good stead. You know, a lot of the kids like Dylan and my daughter was DJing all over Europe. When COVID hit, it hit them hard because they couldn't really go out and play. So I think he's just really looking forward to getting back out there and to play his hometown, the most legendary venue in his hometown. It's a bit of a dream come true for him, I think.
Absolutely. And he's just up the road. It's almost like pinch yourself moment as well. That's class.
No, he's done so well. He's, from the areas he's from, I mean, bless him. I mean, he said to me, we were out having a meal together, me and him, and he said, my old head mistress has got in touch with me and sort of said, would I come back to the school and speak to the kids? Because, I'd be a bit of an inspiration. What do you think? And I was going, absolutely, you should. I said, you're a kid, in your old school and you walk on, you're doing this. I can inspire the next generation. Bless him. He was there going, oh, okay, maybe I'll do that then. But, I don't think he almost quite realises how well he's done already, really, and all credit to him.
Do you know, I think, I don't know if it's the same in South Wales, Johnny, but I feel like Scotland as well, there's almost this imposter syndrome. And when someone does say that, you could be an inspiration, come and talk to folk, you're like, what, me?
Yeah. It was very much that. That was the conversation. And obviously, because I'm a bit older now, I was like, go on, son, you've done great. And like I said, it could be a kid in 20 years coming behind you who's seen you walking into their school hall, and that means everything to them. Footballers do it, don't they? So, yeah, I hope he does it.
What about on the talkSPORT show as well and on the radio? You spoke to many musicians. I know this is quite a vague question, but who's the ones that stand out for you that you've thought are inspirations, that you've maybe spoke to and you've been inspired by them growing up, and it's like the whole don't meet your heroes, but actually they're brand new?
Well, I mean, Paul Weller is the obvious one I just mentioned. He was the first kind of, rock star. I remember seeing him on Top of the Pops singing Strange Town in 1978 and thinking, I want to be like him. That's the guy for me. And I've had him on the show, and he's absolutely amazing. He's a really good mate now, actually, and he's done so well. He stayed in the industry, and the quality of his music as well. I don't think there's been many like him. Bowie, possibly, in the sense that they keep producing such great stuff, over the decades. Noel Gallagher was another one. Obviously, Noel was just such a great interview. He's one of the it's just a brilliant talker. Him and his brother, two of the great rock stars ever, really, in British history. And they're certainly top 5, top 10 for me. And they're so interesting when you talk to them as well, because they've just got that personality. They were just born to be that way. There's no filter. They're going to say what they're going to say, and they're funny as well with it. So, yeah, Noel and Paul have been two that I've had on. They've been absolutely fantastic.
I think the Paul one's such an influence, an interesting one, because I've got a mate who's round about the same age as you, Johnny, from Motherwell, and he's obsessed with Weller, and I actually wind him up about it, saying, like, you're not a wee boy anymore, you're going to stop dressing like him with the same haircut. And
never leaves us, truly, that's the point. It's like, I'm still the same now, really. My missus will say to me every so often, what's that? You go, oh, that's probably some kind of thing Paul Weller would wear. In fact, I think I bought some of the range that he brought up with Sunspiel recently, and I bought a few of his tops, and I was like, oh, this is really nice, Paul. He goes, yeah, looks smart, little grandfather. Yeah, very smart. So, no, it never leaves you. I've got to say, Derek, it never leaves you.
But I think the two examples that you gave there, Noel, even Liam and Paul, it's like they've inspired so many people, but when you go to their gigs, there's so many people that are like clones of them,
Yeah,
it's
absolutely. Like... And young as well, the thing with the Liam one as well is like, he's selling out gigs now, and Liam's about my age, I think, but all the kids in the audience are between the age of 20 and 25 looking like young Liam. It's amazing. Do you know what I mean? It's like, imagine on that kind of effect on people. It's astonishing, really.
I can't believe it. Like, it makes me think, is there nobody filled that void? What is it that's coming through, this type of kid that they still look back to, like the 90s, 2000 era?
Yeah, there is a sort of a theory that a lot of it is mined out, as they say. It's like there's not a lot of places for the kids to go. But, Dylan's a good example. Dylan comes along, he sings in that accent, he does a great finger-picking style. And do you know what he does? I think the thing with Dylan is, as we said, when he plays those places like St. Luke's and he'll play the Paralines, he gets that bounce in the crowd. You can go and see him as a young kid, and you can have a real, almost like it's like a mosh pit in it, which is what you want to do, Derek, when you're 16, 17 at a concert.
Absolutely. I've got this new thing recently, and it's not recent, but I think, it used to be bands when I was growing up, and, I was always wanting to be in a band, but now there seems to be a real platform for individual solo artists playing guitar and singing. You've said Jerry, as you mentioned, and Dylan, and the likes of Jamie Webster coming out of Liverpool, and it is that kind of bouncy guitar, sing-along songs that people really buy into.
If you look at his gigs in Glasgow, like you said, the ones you've seen, it's just the crowd are going crazy. It's great, which is what you want when you're youngster. So they've got that high energy, because everybody, knows, you know, when you're young, you know, the raves and you know, all that kind of stuff, and what DJs play, that keeps a crowd going, bang. So, you know, there's room for more quiet and mellow stuff, but I think if you're young, you still want to have a bounce around at a gig. I loved it when I was that age.
Yeah, so did I, and actually, I still do, to be honest, but I hate, I hate to harp on about this working class thing as well, but I do feel a lot of the time it's, you know, working class voices have been ignored, and when you get people who are really real and they're singing about relatable subjects, and, you know, in council estates or all across the country, it seems to be when they get that platform, people get behind them and they see something in them, they see themselves in these artists.
Yeah,
you know,
they talk to them, and it's from the heart, and they can associate the songs and the stories, and, you know, it's a reflection of their lives, you know, and there's nothing better than that, you know. And that's the story of rock and roll, really, isn't it? All those great songs about you sort of driving your first car, your first love, and have your heart broken. That's what people can associate with, can't they?
Exactly. With this being a Scottish podcast, Johnny, it would be silly not to ask you about, you know, one of your recent productions on the Three Kings. So let's hear a bit about that. How did it come about? For those that are listening or watching to this that maybe haven't heard of it, tell us a bit about it and how the idea and concept came up.
Yeah, it's the story of three great Scottish football managers that kind of changed football, really. We call it the makers of modern football. What, you know, can't be denied is they certainly had a huge effect on the game across the world, really, and across three clubs that have become institutions: Manchester United, Liverpool and Celtic. It's the story of Matt Busby, Jock Stein and Bill Shankly, all born within 30 miles of each other in the area where you come from, you know,
Absolutely.
just south of Gallagher, down to Asia, yeah. And the idea came from my father. Obviously worked in heavy industry, nothing unusual about that from the areas we come from. He was an electrician underground, and he worked in the steelworks, and he was one of those people that had worked underground, you know, and whenever he'd seen a miner on telly, he'd say he's a miner. And I can remember it as a kid, you know, he did, like, Shankly from he's a miner. So when he was, bless him, he was very ill at the end. He had sort of terminal cancer, but he was so stoical about it because he was from that world and that generation. He was like, well, I had a good innings, and, you know, I'm all right, and I'm really happy with my life. And we had great talks together. I used to lie on the bed next to him. And I reminded him of this. I sort of said, oh, do you remember when you always used to say when somebody comes a miner and Shankly's come on a steam? And he laughed and went, well, you remembered it, didn't you? And hopefully you'll keep remembering it. So when he did pass it, I said, well, one of the best things I could probably do for his people's legacy is to tell that story, really. And that was the germ of the idea. And I went to a lovely guy called James Gay Rees and another guy called Paul Martin, who'd done Senna, Amy, Ronaldo, run a really, really, really fantastic production company, and they loved the idea as well. So we thought we'd tell the story for a modern audience, you know. And the good thing is, and it's great talking to a Scottish podcast, when I was a kid growing up, the vast majority of teams that sort of were the best teams in Europe had a Scottish spine. So that's like Nottingham Forest, you know, Ipswich, you know, Man United, Liverpool especially. Yeah, you know, all these teams that, you know, were winning sort of European trophies. That always had 5 or 6 Scottish players. Leeds, obviously, very famously as well. So I wanted to tell that story because what's tended to happen the last 20 years, especially since the Premier League has really taken off, is there seems to be sort of a dismissal about sort of, you know, other leagues, you know, especially the Scottish League. You know, this you know, the Portuguese players coming in is really sexy and all that. And I get it, you know, I understand. But, you know, what I wanted to say, when I was a kid, if you've got a Scottish player in your team, it was considered as a big thing. You know, here's the next superstar for our team. And I wanted to talk about those three managers and how they changed those football clubs, and specifically that high watermark of Scottish football, 1967, where, you know, Scotland beat England, who were world champions, Celtic win the European Cup, Rangers get to the final of the European Cup and this Cup. You know, the powerhouse that was Scottish football, and still can be. You know, still produces great world-class players. And I wanted to tell that story, really, for a generation outside Scotland. And it's been amazing, the effect it's had. It's got 5 stars on Amazon, and it's done really, really well. And I'm just really glad there's a new generation that are seeing, you know, the effect of these kind of men and these people. And Scott, you know, the thing is, I was talking about it this weekend, English league football for a long time was very much a copy of the way they play in Ashbourne, which is, they do this thing, they still play on Ash Wednesday. And there's a big ball in the middle of the village, and they fight the ball from one end of the village to the other. And it's very physical, and they still do it. And the English game was very similar to that. Whereas in Scotland, they developed a very different way of playing football in the early years of football. A passing game, quick passing, Alex James and all those great players. So there's a very different philosophy up in Scotland. And I just wanted to talk about things like that. World record crowds were always broken in Glasgow, for international football and domestic football. And I just think that's been forgotten a little bit. And so I wanted the film to remind people of that history.
Do you know, I find that so refreshing to hear someone that isn't Scottish saying that as well, because, I'm super passionate about the Scottish game, and to be honest, I would rather watch Raith Rovers Dunfermline than Man United Liverpool. That's just what I am. It's like, I'm not caving to that corporate nonsense down south. But to hear someone from outside saying, there is still a story there to tell about Scotland, the history of this game here is vast and people need to know about it. Was there ever a bit of a not a backlash, but a bit of a resistance from people saying, why Scotland? Nobody's interested in Scotland anymore? Or?
If anything, Derek, it was the complete opposite. I think everybody was quite fascinated and interested and wanted to know. And I think there's something in the back of everybody's mind where they go, oh yeah, Scottish football, and there's always that Scottish footballer. There is John Robertson, who was always voted the greatest footballer for Nottingham Forest by their fans. Yeah. There's always Kenny Dalglish, who's voted one of the greatest footballers for Liverpool fans. So then there's something there, in people's minds, where they go, and just recently Andy Robertson, for argument's sake, he's world-class footballer. So I think, I was very heartened by the fact that, so many people were into it. And also, we get a lot of traffic, as they call it, on talks. We're talking about this. Germany's become a very popular destination for football fans to travel to, but Scotland's becoming very popular. I have lots of boys who say to me pretty much what you were saying. They love going up to watch Arbroath, or they love going up to watch Dunfermline, and it's becoming a bit of a day out, for certain sort of English football fans to see football a little bit as it was, I suppose, down south. And a mate of mine was telling me recently that he went up to watch a few Scottish games. The time of his life, he said had a few beers for the game, and there was a great atmosphere, amazing food, and all the rest of it. And he said, I just loved it. So I think actually there is certainly a movement or a core of people that can certainly understand that Scottish football is maybe a little bit more true to the roots and the kind of football that we remember growing up. And I hope that remains, because I'd hate it to become, more corporate and something that, the Premier League is the Premier League, and it's a beast really, and it's a commercial marketing driven thing. But for me personally, I went a few years back to watch Queen's Park play in Annan. One of the best days out ever. Back fast on the train on the way back, the whole lot. Do you know what I mean? It was the real Scottish football day out. And I personally say to people, I cannot recommend it enough.
It's great to hear. It's amazing to hear that from the outside looking in as well. In terms of Stein and Shankly and of course, how did you go about doing some research for that? Was there did you meet any supporters from these clubs? Did you read through the history books? What was the process of that?
Yeah, a bit of everything really, Derek. I mean, I read all the books that have been written about them, or as many as I could find. There's obviously been a lot of books written about the three of them because they're such giants of the game. I mean, in particular, Sir Archie Macpherson's book on Stein is a superb book, and Paddy Barclay, another Scotsman, wrote the Busby book recently. So there's loads of books for them, on them. Lots of films we made. There was a wonderful series made about 30 years ago by the brilliant Hugh McIlvenney, the Scottish writer, called The Football Men. Yeah, that was on the BBC, which was brilliantly done. There was quite a lot of sort of stuff like I had to sift through, but I enjoyed doing it, and it started in just their playing careers were pre-war, certainly in the case of Shankly and Busby. And then Busby was managing straight after the Second World War. Yeah. So I had footage of the late 40s, early 50s, which can look very antiquated now. So I had to make a decision of how I was going to cut that, what music I was going to put to it. Because one of the great lines that was given to me by the producers was, you have to make a film that an 18-year-old kid who knows nothing about these three men can watch and enjoy. Yeah. And that's what I try to do. I try to sort of find that footage and that information and sort of tell it for a new modern audience, and sometimes even trying to sort of say, we used to say things in it like, Alex James, for argument's sake, which lived 2 streets away from Matt Busby in Bells Hill. Oh. He said, that was like living 2 streets away from Lionel Messi in the modern. It's
incredible, isn't it? It's
incredible. When you explain it like that, a young kid will go, oh, I get it. So that's the environment these men grew up in. It was such a. There's a great book being written by Malcolm Gladwell called The Outbreakers, and he explains why things happen. He says, there was a reason why in in San Francisco, all these great computer companies popped up. He said, and he explains it. There was all the right materials were in place, and there was terminals to go on, and all this kind of stuff happened, and they were all mates to each other. There's a reason why these three men came from that area, and this is what I try to explain in the film. They grew up in an area obsessed with football. Obsessed with it, the biggest, like I said earlier, the biggest crowds and all that kind of stuff. All they did was talk about football all day. Paddy Barclay said it was literally like the Vienna coffee houses during the 1848 series of revolutions, only in football terms. All everybody talked about was football. All everybody was play football. I mean, Shankly was obsessed with the game. It was like to his detriment in the end. Stein died at the side of a football pitch. Busby, crashed in it. These men were football, literally in human form. And there's a reason why those areas of Scotland were the breeding ground for those kind of men. And that's what the story I wanted to tell.
I think you could almost, not that I'm putting ideas in your head here, Jonny, I think you could almost do a follow-up as well about Sir Alex Ferguson. I feel that he's almost from a similar mould as well, isn't he? It is that, their families were brought up as miners or, shipyard workers, and it's been instilled into them hard work and determination and I suppose a winning mentality as well.
But he's kind of like almost like I was thinking, the son of the three, really. He's got
that's exactly it.
Personality traits of the three of them. Obviously, he was Stein's assistant, wasn't he? And he still says Stein is the greatest manager of all time. I think in 442 he said they said who's the best manager of all time and explain why. He just says it's very simple. It's Jock Stein. He won the European Cup with the Glasgow District 11, and but he also talks very, very eloquently and brilliantly about Busby and Shankly. Busby and Shankly were fascinating because they were really good mates. They played in the Scottish team in the war together. And then when the Liverpool job came up in the late 50s, Matt Busby recommended him for the job. And
that's incredible, isn't it?
Incredible. And famously turned to his assistant, a Welshman called Jimmy Merthyr, and said, as he put the phone down, I might regret that because he'll get them going. And he was right. And I thought to myself, now that's a measure of the man that he didn't think, I'm not going to recommend him for that because he'll become a rival. He was so close, he went, no, he's the man for the job. And, they became literally like Liverpool Man United's rivalry was born because of Busby and Shankly. And that was great to tell a new generation of kids that, who grow up supporting Liverpool and Man United, two of the biggest clubs in the world. You go, well, actually, this is the genesis of their rivalry. It didn't exist before the mid-60s. This is because these two Scottish managers who literally swapped titles and cups year after year after year through that period. You had Roger Hunt playing for him, and George Best playing for him, and Ian St. John playing for them, and Dennis. So you just go, this is a great story. And then when you tell people of how this thing began, they get it then, and they go, okay, so this really, Liverpool Man United's rivalry began in Scotland. And that's a great thing to tell people. Yeah.
If you had to choose one of them, who would you say was the best? If you really had to make you pick one.
I've been asked this quite a few times. I do always say the same one. If I had a time machine, right, and I won the Euro billions, and I could buy Merthyr Town Football Club, and I had £100 million in the bank there to start, and I had a time machine, I would take the 1967 Jock Stein back with me. 1967 Jock Stein won every single trophy that he was possible to win that year. It's the only football club I think that's ever done it in history. It might even be the only sporting team. So they won every competition they entered. Glasgow District Cup, Scottish League Cup, Scottish FA Cup, European Cup, right? And remember, they had a league in there with Rangers in it were one of the strongest teams in Europe. Hearts were strong. Aberdeen was strong. A fine Motherwell team. So this is not any old domestic league. This is the high watermark of Scottish football. They win that league. Then they win the European Cup, right, with this Glasgow District 11. And remember, this is the big part for me. They beat a brilliant Inter Milan team that were considered impossible to break down. And everybody said, if Celtic concede an early goal, that could be it. They concede the early goal and then batter Inter Milan in the rest of the game and score the goals. I think the 1967 Jock Stein, I mean, everything about him, his motivation, his man management, his tactical ability. For me, I think he's probably the greatest manager that ever lived in that year.
You think so, yeah?
Well, I think Ferguson obviously runs him very close in 1999 at Manchester United. Of
course.
Runs him very, very close.
Yeah.
But I'd love to ask Alex Ferguson, does he think in that year that he was better than what Stein did in 1967? I think because of the money that was available in the game in the late 90s, and he used it very wisely, but I think what Stein did with 11 players who, were all born within famously, 30 miles of Celtic Park. I think it's the greatest football achievement. It's the only thing I felt that topped Forest, what Clough did with Forest. We took a mid-table second division team I just thought that what they did that year was I mean, listen, again, I can talk myself out of it because Busby winning the European Cup 10 years after the team dying is incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, and you could talk about Shankly, who created an empire from nothing in Liverpool. It was a mid-table second division, and I think they qualified for Europe something like 26 years on a trot or something from the time Shankly took over. So there's all these things, but for me, that 1967 achievement at Celtic was remarkable.
You touched on Forest there and Clough, and I suppose you're now on the board at Nottingham Forest. Was that off the back of the work that you'd done for them, or how did that come around as well?
Yeah, it's a really interesting story actually. The new owner came in, the Greek shipping magnate, Mr. Marinakis, lovely fella. He's seen the film and he asked to meet me.
Yeah, amazing. It's amazing.
So got on really well, and he said to me, "Oh, look, I like you. I like what you sort of talk about football and the rest of it. Would you be interested in coming on and give me a hand?" And I was a bit like, at first, I'll be honest, I was very working class again. The imposter thing. I was like, "Well, that's not really for me." And he was a bit like, "Come on, why not? What's to stop you?" So I was a bit like, "Okay, well, I'll give it a go." And I've been on there 4 years now, and they're having a decent season now. Steve Cooper's come in, and it's been really enlightening, Derek, to be behind the scenes. I bet you can tell anybody, because I was one of those before I went behind the scenes who was very opinionated. Oh, this is how they should do it. Yeah. When you get behind the scenes, you realise it's a lot more complicated than you realise, because there's so many other factors that you don't know about until you are behind the scenes, and in personal relationships with people and all those kind of things that are really important in any business. I'm so glad I did it. It's been an amazing experience, but it's nothing like I ever expected. It's been much, much more complicated and sometimes difficult. And sometimes, absolutely brilliant, because there's so much on a result now. You feel it. But it's been quite a journey, as they say.
How often do you get along? Do you go every week? And I suppose a big question for me is that I'm obviously a huge Motherwell fan, and for the thought of going on a board at a club that I don't support at first would be like, should I do that? But I suppose you've also got such an affinity there because of the whole Clough story as well. Yeah,
I was the same thing. I was a bit like, well, do you really want me? I grew up watching Cardiff and Merthyr, but he was a bit like, well, you've done the film, and you get a great relationship with the fans who've been unbelievable to me. I mean, they've supported the film, bought it in their hundreds of thousands, and so I can't thank them enough for that, really. So I thought, well, if I got something to offer, then that's brilliant. They've been really good, actually, because obviously the talkSPORT side of things and all that has really taken off this last sort of 18 months. It's been brilliant. It's been so successful. So they let me go and do that now. So I'm a kind of non-exec. Yeah. So they've been really good. So I just get along where I can, see my mates and all the rest of it, and and enjoy it now. In that sense. So yeah, honestly, they couldn't have been more accommodating, really. And I've really enjoyed it. It's been a great experience. Do you know what I mean? It's been a great experience.
I suppose that's now your hometown team as well. It's not as if it's came.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of lived in Nottingham for nearly 10 years now. It's a long time, really, isn't it? So yeah, I do. I've been down to Merthyr a few times. Obviously, I buy a season ticket every year to sort of to do that, and I do. I do sponsor the shorts. Me and my partner Vicky's company have got. So we try to do what we can. I mean, I think ultimately when I get older, maybe towards retirement, my dream scenario, Derek, would be to sort of get involved in Merthyr at board level and try and see if I can help my hometown club and bring some of my experience and what I've learned to them. And that's maybe something that I'd consider in a few years' time.
Would you ever move back to Wales, or is that that's in the past?
Yeah, I think I would actually. I mean, I do try to spend a little bit of time. It's hard though, because obviously everything's based in London, certainly more my work, and Nottingham. So it's difficult to get down there. But I definitely, as I get older, it's something I plan to do. I really want to spend more time in Wales, watching Merthyr and that kind of thing. That's a bit of a dream for me. One of the other things I did say the other day to my missus, I was like, I wouldn't mind getting a place in Scotland as well. I wouldn't mind going up there to watch football.
That would be brilliant.
She was like, buy a place to go and watch Scottish football. I was like, yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think, in time, as I do get towards retirement, I would love to sort of spend a few weeks going to different Scottish football grounds. That would be a bit of a dream scenario for me, just going to different games right across the country,
Jonny, I know you've got the Stein connection there, and Vicky and Martin will probably be trying to get you to support Celtic, but if you're coming to Scotland, you're a Welsh fan.
But when I was younger, we had a thing going with Queen's Park. This is Merthyr Town.
Of course.
So we used to come up and swap games with Queen's Park, and
I've been as well.
Yeah, I've been to see them. But Mark probably explained to you, Mark Evans.
Yeah.
He started arranging it. So I've been to see them many times, but I have got some. I've got a Motherwell connection. I've got a mate who's a Motherwell fan, and I've been asked a few times about going to see them. Do you know the new magazine out there, Pananero? Have you seen that?
Yeah.
So there's a few boys involved with that.
Actually, the guy I mentioned earlier, who's a big Paul Weller fan, he's involved in some of the writing for that as well. So he's doing a bit about Motherwell and the issue that's coming out this month. So
that's right. So them boys have got Motherwell connections, and they've sort of said, try and get down to a game. So I'd like to go to as many games as I possibly can, really, and try to see as many teams. I got a mate of mine, funny enough, who's just taken over as CEO at Dunfermline, David Cook.
Oh, amazing!
He was in charge of the commercial division at Forest. Great guy, brilliant guy, and he's just taken over. And I'm so pleased for him because he wouldn't have left Forest, but his hometown club came up, as CEO. Mate, you've got to do that. Do you know what I mean? So he's just gone. So I've got to go and see him as well. I got brilliant mates who support Dundee United. Dave McLean, who's the manager of Placebo. He's a massive Dundee United fan. He's keen to tip. So I'm thinking I might go up and I might go and see the Well. I might go and see Celtic, Queen's Park, and maybe do a journey up the East Coast there.
Absolutely. What's the future looking like? The immediate future for you? What have you got in the next coming months to a year?
Well, we got me and Vicky started up a company called Build Your Own Films, and that's got a bit of momentum. We had our first commission with ITV, which is out later this year, Without Sin, which stars Vicky, and I've got some offers on the table for some more football docs, which have they've done incredibly well for me, touch wood. So I'm really pleased about that. So there's more offers. So I'll be deciding in the next month, I think, Derek, on what I'm going to do next. And then I'll take it from there, really. I did, funny enough, somebody did say to me, you should do the new firm story, Aberdeen, Dundee United. And I was like, that is a good story.
That is a very good story, yeah.
What happened in the mid-80s that these two teams sort of came from nowhere and, really, really took Europe on to an extent. Do you know what I mean? And that was a good story. There's so many great football stories that are out there. So, and it seems to be at this moment, Derek, there's an audience for it. People are really enjoying them. So I hope to make a few more in the next few years. Absolutely. Exciting times, looking forward to it. And I have to say, the new film one would be fantastic. It's almost a story that's not told enough. And, it's got an Alex Ferguson connection there as well. So it would probably appeal to a wider audience down south as well. Yeah, it's good. It's a good idea. Maybe we should do that, mate, me and you. Where do I sign? No, Jonny, honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate you giving me your time as well, and thanks very much. Really enjoyed it, Derek. And like I said, I'll definitely, when I'm up next, we'll have to grab that beer and maybe take in a well match. Absolutely. Thanks very much, Jonny. Top man.